16 years after vanishing. Daughter returns, remembers. One name uncovers a terrifying hidden truth. They vanished without a trace. Her husband, her little girl, a red Cadillac, a smile in a photograph. 16 years of silence. Until today, when the phone rang and a rusted wreck in a junkyard whispered, they were never really gone. The light of a mid-autumn sun streamed through the worn curtains of the Whitmore living room, painting amber streaks across the hardwood floor. It was late afternoon, one of those quiet, hollow hours where the day seems to hold its breath, and time itself moves like it's remembering something painful. Elaine sat on the edge of the floral-patterned couch, the remote clenched tight in her hand. Her thumb hovered just above the volume button, motionless. Next to her, her mother Ruth leaned forward with a steady, practiced stillness, like someone who had learned long ago that grief takes up less room if you don't speak it aloud. The lines on her face told of decades survived, but today they deepened just a little more. Today always did that. "It's almost time," Elaine whispered, her voice dry as paper. She turned up the volume by 2 notches. Her eyes never left the screen. For 16 years, Elaine had done this. Paid local news channels to run the same segment every October 12th, the date her family disappeared. A tradition soaked in pain and silence, one that made her feel like she was doing something, even when everything else in her life had gone still. The commercial faded. The screen flickered to a familiar image, one that hadn't aged, though she had, a family photo. Alan, in his favorite plaid shirt, mustache thick and warm eyes squinting in the sunlight. Standing beside him, tiny and beaming, was Clara, 8 years old, a rainbow clip in her hair. She had a grin wide enough to rival the Texas sky behind her. Beside the photograph was a gleaming red 1979 Cadillac DeVille. The anchor's voice came in steady, as if unaware how many pieces it broke every time it spoke this story aloud. 16 years ago today, Dr. Alan Whitmore and his daughter Clara vanished during a weekend road trip. They were last seen driving a red Cadillac, license plate THB 143. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Austin Police Department. Elaine clicked the TV off. The silence that followed was worse. Not the kind that brings peace. The kind that presses against your chest like a weight you forgot how to lift. Ruth didn't speak. She just reached over and gave Elaine's hand a squeeze. "I'll go freshen up," she said quietly, pushing herself off the couch, bone stiff but determined. Elaine nodded, barely watching her go. Her eyes drifted to the bookshelf near the far wall, where a worn leather photo album sat like a relic in a museum of heartbreak. She pulled it down and returned to the sofa, her fingers trembling just slightly as she opened it. There they were again, frozen in time. Alan standing beside the Cadillac, proud as a boy with his first toy. Clara on her first day of school, backpack twice her size. The 3 of them at Barton Springs, mid-laugh, eyes bright, hands intertwined. Her family, suspended forever in moments that no longer existed. She traced Clara's face with her fingertip, voice barely above a breath. "Where are you?" The ring of the phone startled her. It rang sharp, cutting through the room like a shout in a church. She closed the album with gentle hands, set it aside, and walked to the kitchen. Picked up the receiver. Hello? Mrs. Whitmore, this is Officer Daniels with the Austin Police Department, the voice on the line said. Calm, professional, the kind of tone that made Elaine's legs go weak. I'm calling because we've received a report of potential evidence found at a junkyard in San Marcos. We believe it may be related to your husband and daughter's case. Elaine grabbed the counter for support. The room tilted slightly. What kind of evidence? We'd prefer not to discuss details over the phone, ma'am. A patrol car can be there in 10 minutes to bring you to the site. Would you be available? She didn't hesitate. Yes, I'll be ready. She hung up and turned toward the stairs. Mom, she called out, voice louder than she meant. The police just called. They found something at a junkyard. They think it might be connected to Alan and Clara. Ruth reappeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale, eyes wide. What did they find? They wouldn't say, but they're sending a car right now. All weariness evaporated from Ruth's body as she hurried down. I'm coming with you. The patrol car pulled up within minutes. The officer behind the wheel, young, tight-lipped, introduced himself as Officer Martinez. He drove in near silence, leaving Elaine and Ruth to their thoughts. The Texas landscape passed in a blur. Yellowed fields, skeletal trees, distant billboards, sun-bleached and forgotten. Elaine's hands fidgeted in her lap. Her mother sat stiff, clutching her purse like it held the last ounce of strength she had left. When they arrived, yellow tape and flashing lights greeted them. Harrow's Auto Salvage was an industrial graveyard, metal stacked like bones, rusted dreams crushed and piled high. Officer Martinez led them through a maze of wreckage. At the center of the scene stood a cluster of investigators, and something else, a red shape, crushed, twisted. Detective Solano turned to them, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Whitmore? Mrs. Ruth Whitmore? Thank you for coming. What did you find? Elaine asked. Her voice shook, but her spine stayed straight. The detective stepped aside. There it was, what remained of a 1979 Cadillac DeVille. Dull now, stripped of its shine, crushed nearly beyond recognition, but not completely. There was still the chrome wheel cover, still that faint, unmistakable curve of design, still that tiny dent, right rear wheel, where Alan had hit a curb the week before they vanished. Elaine nearly collapsed. Oh my God, Ruth whispered beside her, grabbing her arm. Elaine stepped forward, like walking in a dream. She reached out and touched the dent with trembling fingers. We were going to get it fixed, she murmured, right after the trip. Detective Solano moved closer. Can you confirm this was your husband's car, ma'am? Elaine didn't look at her. Her eyes stayed on the car. Yes, this is it. Behind her, a man stepped forward nervously, wiping his hands on a rag. I'm Dean. I run the yard. I'm the one who called. I saw the segment on TV, and I recognized it. Elaine turned to him. How did it get here? I don't know, Dean said, voice breaking. There's no record. It's not logged in our system. Someone just left it, and it was scheduled to be crushed today. Elaine's heart thudded louder. Detective Solano raised an eyebrow. Who had access to the intake area? Dean shifted. Travis, my technician. He might have logged it, or maybe not. I'll call him. But there was no answer. Just a long dial tone. And in the quiet that followed, a breeze passed through the stacked metal. It whistled low, like a whisper, and Elaine felt something stir in her chest. A presence, a shadow, something that hadn't stirred in 16 years. She didn't know if it was dread or a buried scream finally rising, but she knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Someone had just brought the past back from the dead. The silence in the car on the way back from the junkyard was unbearable, but not because no one spoke. It was the kind of silence that thickened in the air, that wrapped around your ribs and made your heart beat louder just to remind you it was still there. Elaine sat in the front seat, her knuckles white as they gripped her purse, her eyes locked on the blur of the Texas horizon. Beside her, Ruth stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, mouth pressed in a line that had been forming since the moment they saw the crushed Cadillac. The patrol car dropped them at the edge of their neighborhood with a quiet, "We'll be in touch," from the officer who didn't want to meet Elaine's eyes. She didn't blame him. Even she couldn't look herself in the mirror right now. Ruth didn't go inside. She stood in the driveway, scanning the sky, like the answer to everything might descend on a cloud. Elaine, though, turned and glanced toward her own car. The old Buick, the one Alan used to change the oil on himself, sat idle. A dull red warning light was still flashing on the dash. She hadn't even noticed earlier. She walked toward it, climbed in, turned the key. The engine stuttered, then died. Nothing. "Just great," she muttered. "I'll call Travis," Ruth offered. "Didn't he say he worked on cars too?" Elaine hesitated. Something about Travis hadn't sat right since the moment they'd met. But when you've just seen the wreckage of the car your husband and daughter vanished in, and your engine won't start, rational judgment isn't always the loudest voice. "Sure," Elaine said. "Go ahead." 30 minutes later, Travis's truck pulled up, humming gently down their street. He stepped out with that same easy, casual demeanor he'd worn at the junkyard, like none of this had shaken him. "Looks like a battery or fuse," he said after a glance under the hood. "But if you want, I can tow it back to the yard and take a proper look." Elaine didn't answer. Ruth, however, was watching him with the kind of focused calm that only mothers with years of reading people knew how to wear. As he turned to leave, Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You ever lose someone, Travis?" she asked, her voice gentle, but cutting through the quiet like a knife. He paused, hands in his pockets. "My mom passed a few years ago," he said. "Cancer." "That's different," Ruth replied. "You got to say goodbye." He blinked, gave her a hollow smile, and walked back to his truck. Elaine said nothing. Not because she agreed or disagreed, but because her heart was pounding again, and she didn't know why. She didn't want to admit it, but something in her stomach had begun to coil the moment he walked up her driveway. The next day, she and Ruth returned to the junkyard, hoping to speak to Dean again. But he wasn't there. Travis was. He welcomed them with a slightly surprised but polite nod. "We were wondering," Elaine said, "if we might take another look at the car." "It's still under investigation," Travis said. "Cops are keeping that area closed. But if there's something else you're curious about, maybe I can help." Elaine almost said no, almost turned around. But then she remembered the look in Alan's eyes the day he showed her that Cadillac for the first time. The pride, the joy. "There was a bag," she said slowly. "Clara's. A small blue handbag. She carried it everywhere. I've been wondering if anything like that was found or turned in." Travis frowned thoughtfully. Then, as if just remembering something, he nodded. Actually, yeah, there's a small purse in my office. Came in with a batch of scrap. Not sure it's connected, but you're welcome to take a look. He led them down a narrow hallway at the back of the salvage office toward a small side room with a window covered in grime. The room smelled of motor oil and sun-bleached paper. As Travis unlocked the door, Ruth's eyes flicked past him, and she froze. Elaine noticed it too, just for a second. A flash of blue on the top shelf of a dusty cabinet. A small handbag, the exact shade Clara used to carry, the kind with white trim and a silver snap clasp. Travis stepped inside and grabbed it. "This the one?" he asked casually. Elaine took it from him, her hands trembling. It felt the same, looked the same. Even the tiny scuff near the bottom corner was in the same place. But when she opened it, her breath caught. The tag inside, the one that should have said Barbie or Mattel, had been burned. Not cleanly removed. Not faded. Burned. The fabric warped and glossy, like it had been seared with a household iron. "Where did this come from?" Elaine asked, her voice tighter now. "Was just in a box of parts someone brought in," Travis said, shrugging. "No name, no paperwork. Stuff like that turns up all the time." Elaine nodded, not believing a word. Ruth stepped forward. She picked up the bag, held it close to her face, inspecting the stitchwork, the wear on the edges. Then she said something Elaine hadn't considered. "It doesn't smell old." Elaine blinked. Ruth was right. It smelled like oil, rust, junkyard air, but not like something that had been in a forgotten box for 16 years. Travis shifted his weight. "You can keep it if you want. Honestly, it's just gathering dust." Elaine nodded, slowly placing the bag inside her own. "Thank you," she said, her tone clipped. As they walked out, Ruth leaned in close and whispered, "That bag wasn't sitting on a shelf for 16 years. Someone planted it. Recently." Elaine didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat was tight. Her hands were shaking. Her mind replayed the last day she saw Clara, tiny, proud, swinging that blue purse like she was the queen of the schoolyard. And now it was here, burned, hidden, offered with too much ease. As they got into the car, Elaine looked back at the salvage yard, at the figure of Travis disappearing behind the office door. She didn't have proof, not yet, but something in her bones, deeper than logic, stronger than grief, was waking up again. Whatever happened to her husband and daughter hadn't been a moment of tragedy. It had been a cover-up, and that bag, that was the first crack in the wall that had hidden the truth for 16 years. The wind had picked up by late afternoon, rustling the brittle oak leaves outside the antique shop on Burnett Road. A bell above the door chimed softly as Elaine stepped inside, followed closely by Ruth, who still held Clara's blue handbag like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. The store smelled of aged wood, musty books, and lemon oil, memories layered in dust. Glass cases lined with vintage toys gleamed under soft yellow lights, and a man in his 60s with thinning hair looked up from behind the counter. "Well now, Mrs. Whitmore," he greeted, recognizing her instantly. "You've brought me something interesting today?" Elaine nodded, setting the bag down gently like a sacred artifact. "We were hoping you could tell us if it's authentic. It looks like a Mattel piece from the early 80s. My daughter had one just like it. He leaned over the bag, adjusting his glasses. I'm no Barbie expert, he admitted, but Robert is. One moment. A younger man, mid-40s, wiry, with salt and pepper hair, emerged from the back. Robert had the meticulous air of a collector, the kind of person who handled childhood with tweezers. He didn't smile, but his eyes lit up when he saw the bag. Oh, he said, lifting it carefully. This takes me back. He turned it over, examined the seams, the snap, the vinyl finish. He brought out a jeweler's loupe and inspected the tag. This is Mattel, he confirmed. From the Barbie World collection, limited run, 1983 to 84 if I had to guess. Rare color, rare clasp, but this tag's been tampered with. Elaine leaned in. Robert pointed to the lining. It was heated, ironed, probably with a household appliance. The ink was erased, deliberately. The plastics puckered. That's not natural wear. Elaine felt her stomach knot. You're saying someone tried to hide what it was? Ruth asked. Yes, and not long ago either. The fabric would have yellowed if it were decades old. This is recent damage. Elaine's voice was low, heavy with realization. Could someone use a bag like this to make something look older than it is? Robert nodded. Or to hide that it belonged to someone in particular. Elaine looked down at the bag. Her breath slowed. Everything about it screamed Clara. The way the vinyl curved. The silver clasp she used to click open again and again on long car rides. But now, it wasn't just memory. It was evidence. They thanked the shop owners and stepped back into the golden light outside. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Elaine's fingers clutched her keys, but when she opened the car door and climbed in, she paused. A red light blinked on the dashboard. Brake warning. She pressed the pedal. It sank all the way to the floor. Her chest tightened. She tried the ignition. The engine sputtered, then died. Ruth leaned forward. What's wrong? I don't know. Elaine tried again. Nothing. Brake system's shot, she said, voice cracking. Call AAA, Ruth said. I would, if my phone wasn't on 2%. They sat in silence for a moment. Then, as if summoned, a truck pulled into the lot. Elaine's heart jumped. It was Travis. And beside him in the cab sat a man Elaine didn't recognize. Taller, bulkier, wearing a dark flannel shirt, and a look that didn't belong in daylight. Well, what are the odds? Travis said, as he stepped out. Too casual. Car trouble again? Elaine swallowed hard. Apparently. Want a ride? He offered. We're headed back down 35 anyway. Ruth stared at him. To the junkyard? Unless you'd prefer the police station? Travis raised an eyebrow, as if daring her. Elaine hesitated. Ruth glanced over, brow furrowed. The police can wait, Travis said. Let's fix your car first. It won't take long. Elaine looked at her mother. Ruth's eyes narrowed. You sure? We'll call Detective Solano from there, Elaine said. This'll save us hours. Travis opened the passenger door. Dale stepped out and nodded at them, expression blank, unreadable. He didn't say a word. The ride began in silence. Elaine sat in the middle, between Travis and Dale, while Ruth climbed into the back. For the first few minutes, Travis made light conversation. Weather, traffic, something about gas prices. Neither woman replied much. Elaine's attention shifted as she noticed Dale quietly adjusting the rearview mirror, not to see the road, but to keep both women in sight. She looked down at her phone, still dying. She looked at Ruth in the mirror. Ruth was texting, quietly, discreetly. Her hands were low, the screen shielded behind her purse. Elaine caught the flicker of fear in her mother's eyes. They weren't heading toward the junkyard. Not really. They were turning off the interstate onto unfamiliar back roads, weaving through fields and cedar groves. "This doesn't look like I-35, Elaine said. Travis didn't turn. "Shortcut." "Shortcut to where?" Ruth asked sharply. Dale finally spoke, voice gravelly. "Change of plans." Elaine's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak. Dale reached beneath the seat, pulled out a pistol, and turned toward them. "Put these on," he growled, tossing 2 pairs of handcuffs into Elaine's lap. "Now!" Elaine's mind spun. She froze. "Do it!" Dale shouted, his voice cutting through the cab like a blade. Hands trembling, Elaine snapped the cuffs around her own wrists. Behind her, Ruth did the same, her face ashen. Then came the gags. Dale stuffed fabric into Elaine's mouth before she could scream. She choked, panic rising like fire. "Lay down," he barked. "Both of you, now." Travis's eyes met Elaine's in the mirror. Gone was the mechanic's smile. Gone was any trace of sympathy. His expression was flat, calculated, cold. Elaine curled onto the floor of the truck's cab, steel against her wrists, carpet scratching her cheek. Her daughter's handbag, Clara's, pressed against her ribs beneath her coat like a relic no one else was supposed to find. And all she could think, in the dark silence of that moving coffin, was that the bag hadn't led her to answers. It had led her into a trap. The world narrowed to the steady hum of tires on gravel and the sickening creak of metal tools rattling behind the truck's seat. Elaine couldn't lift her head. Her wrists were bound, mouth gagged, cheek pressed hard against the vinyl floor mat that smelled of old gasoline and rubber. In the back seat, Ruth's muffled breath came in quick, shallow bursts, like each one was stolen, not earned. The drive twisted off paved roads and into wilderness. The sound beneath them changed, from highway smooth to dirt road groaning. Branches slapped the truck's sides. At one point, they passed under something that sounded like corrugated tin. Elaine guessed it was a crude gate or canopy, but she couldn't see. She couldn't move. Finally, they stopped. The doors opened. Hands reached in, rough. Elaine was yanked upward by her arm and dragged out of the truck like a sack. Her knees scraped the gravel. She tasted blood in her mouth from the gag. Behind her, she could hear Dale muttering something unintelligible, and Ruth being pulled from the back seat. Her muffled cry stifled by the hand pressing down on her shoulder. They were marched through tall, dry grass, past a rusted camper, and toward a house that leaned slightly to one side. Its white paint had peeled to gray. Its windows sagged under the weight of grime, and the porch moaned under their boots. A screen door hung crooked, banging once as they passed through. Inside, the smell was worse. Sour sweat, mildew, smoke. The air was thick, like it had never been stirred. They were led down a narrow hall, into a room that might have once been an office. A warped desk, an unplugged computer, filing cabinets lining the wall like coffins. A man sat near the window, his face lit faintly by late sunlight slicing through the blinds. He was older, thinning gray hair, hands that trembled slightly on his knees. He looked up as they entered, but didn't speak. "Watch them," Travis ordered. "Don't let them talk." Dale ripped off their gags, but left the cuffs. He shoved Elaine and Ruth down against a rusted radiator and looped a chain through their bindings. A heavy padlock clicked. Then the door slammed shut behind them. The older man didn't look at them. Elaine coughed, chest heaving. Ruth's voice, hoarse but sharp, broke the quiet. Sir, please. My name is Ruth Whitmore. This is my daughter. We're not here for anything. We're just looking for someone. The man said nothing. Elaine leaned forward. 16 years ago, my husband and daughter went missing. We found his car. We found a bag that belonged to my daughter. She was 8. Her name is Clara. Do you know a girl named Clara? Still silence. Until finally, his eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back. Then, in a whisper so faint it barely reached them, they call her Samantha here. Elaine's heart nearly stopped. Ruth straightened. Samantha? You mean she's here? She's alive? The man, his name, they would later learn was Earl, didn't answer right away. Then he looked down and said, They changed her name about 4 years ago. She doesn't talk much anymore. Elaine felt tears burning at the edges of her eyes. I want to see her. Please. Earl's jaw clenched. You don't understand what they are, who you're dealing with. You're not like them, Ruth said. I can see it. The moment cracked, his face softened, just a little. I'll see what I can do. Then suddenly, footsteps in the hall. Earl stood up, quickly. Be quiet, he hissed, his voice hard again. Don't speak. The door opened. Travis entered. Behind him, a man Elaine instantly recognized as the Alpha, the one the others deferred to. He wore a stained white tank top and boxer shorts. Muscular, hairy arms marked with faded prison tattoos. His presence was wrong. Too confident. Too comfortable. Like he didn't see Elaine and Ruth as human, just pieces. So, these are the famous ladies, he said, his voice gravelly, thick. You're here for Samantha? Elaine lifted her chin, defiant despite the tremor in her throat. I want to see my daughter. The man, Raymond, smirked. Well, let's play a game then. He snapped his fingers. 3 young women were led into the room. They were in their 20s, all pale, silent, and eerily still. Each had similar long brown hair, heads down, no eye contact. One of these is Samantha, Raymond said. You both get one guess. Point at the same time. Get it right. I'll let you see her. Just see her, mind you. Elaine's eyes darted from face to face. Her heart pounded in her ears. None of them looked like Clara. But there, on the second girl, a tiny scar right above the right eyebrow. The scar Clara got when she fell off her bike in the 2nd grade. Elaine's breath caught. She nodded almost imperceptibly at Ruth. 1, 2, 3, Raymond said. They both pointed. The second girl, Raymond's eyebrows lifted. Well, I'll be damned, mother's intuition. The other 2 girls were escorted out without a word. Raymond stepped forward, reaching out to stroke the young woman's hair. Samantha, he purred, show your guests some hospitality. Elaine flinched. No, don't touch her. Raymond ignored her. Samantha, he said louder, strip. The girl didn't react, not at first. Then, mechanically, she reached for the hem of her shirt. Elaine screamed, No, stop it! Don't make her do this! Raymond's smile curled cruelly. You want something better? Fine. He turned to Clara. Strip your mother. Elaine's vision blurred. Rage, fear, shame. Every nerve in her body burned. Don't you dare, she whispered. Clara, no, Samantha, stepped forward, still expressionless, reaching out a hand toward Elaine's shoulder. Elaine began to cry, but then sirens, distant at first, then louder. Raymond froze. "Boss!" Travis shouted from the hallway. "It's the police! They're surrounding the place!" Raymond roared, spun toward the window, then toward the two women. "I'll kill them myself!" He reached for a pistol tucked into Travis's waistband. But before he could aim, Earl burst through the door. "No!" Two shots fired. Blood exploded across the wall. Earl collapsed. Raymond screamed in fury and pain. The gun clattered. Then the room exploded in light. "Police! Hands in the air!" Armed officers swarmed in, shouting, boots thudding across floorboards. Dale dropped his weapon. Travis froze. Raymond tried to run. Another shot. This one clean to the shoulder, dropped him like a stone. Elaine felt the handcuffs being cut, her arms freed, her lungs gasping. A female officer wrapped a blanket around her, shouting orders into her radio. Ruth stumbled toward Clara, Samantha, who stood frozen in the center of the room, eyes vacant, unmoved by the chaos. Elaine stepped forward, heartbreaking. "Clara," she whispered, touching her daughter's cheek. "It's me, Mom." There was no response, only the sound of paramedics rushing to Earl's side and the heavy breath of a world breaking open. And for the first time in 16 years, Elaine was touching her daughter again. But all she could feel was the chill of someone who hadn't known what love felt like for a very, very long time. They say healing begins the moment you realize you survived. But that's a lie. For Elaine, survival wasn't a moment. It was a slow, aching unraveling of everything she thought she was strong enough to endure. The police lights faded. The farm was sealed. The press exploded with headlines. But none of that mattered when her daughter sat across from her in a hospital gown, staring at the wall as if it might blink back. The psychiatric ward in Austin General was quiet, clinical, and cold. Clara, still called Samantha on her patient bracelet, hadn't spoken a word in 3 days. Not to the doctors, not to the nurses, not to Elaine. Ruth stayed in a nearby hotel and came every morning with coffee. Neither of them drank. She would place the cup on the windowsill and sit, sometimes whispering stories from Clara's childhood, sometimes just humming softly, like she used to when rocking her own daughter to sleep. Elaine watched, waited, hoped. She studied every movement, every twitch, every blink, searching for signs of her child, her Clara. But what stared back at her was a shell. One night, she sat alone by Clara's bedside. Rain tapped at the glass like fingers asking to be let in. "I don't know what they did to you," she whispered, "but I remember who you are. You loved peanut butter and banana sandwiches. You used to cry when you saw a spider, but then apologized to it after I squashed it. You had a laugh that filled the whole house, like wind chimes in a thunderstorm." She reached out, gently tucked a strand of hair behind Clara's ear. "I never stopped looking. Not for one day." No response. Just that stillness. That heavy, unnatural stillness. But then, faint. So faint, she thought she imagined it. A blink, then another, and finally a slow turn of the head. Clara looked at her. "Who are you?" Elaine broke. The tears she'd buried behind strength, behind composure, spilled out. She smiled through them. "I'm your mother, baby." Clara stared. Her mouth trembled, but no sound came. "I'm not Samantha," she said quietly. "No, you're not." The next hours blurred. Clara didn't remember much, only flashes. a gravel path, a door that was always locked, a man with a belt who told her God hated liars, a room with no windows, and someone whispering lullabies through the vents. Elaine wrote everything down. That same night, Ruth pulled Elaine aside in the hallway. Her face was pale, drawn. "Earl's awake," she said. "He's asking for you." Elaine rushed to the ICU. Earl looked worse than she'd expected. Pale, fragile, wires snaking from his arms. But his eyes were clear. "I wasn't always a coward," he said first thing. "But I became one." Elaine shook her head. "You saved us." "No," he rasped. "I just stopped watching." He told her everything. How he joined Raymond's group 20 years ago, thinking they were just a militia, men who didn't trust the system. How it grew darker. They started taking girls, changed names, broke minds. "I tried to leave once," he said, eyes full of regret. "They broke my ribs, said if I ever talked, they'd kill my grandson." Elaine froze. "Your grandson?" "Micah. He was the one who gave you the jacket, the one with the notebook." Elaine's heart pounded. He knew? He knew something was wrong. He stayed long enough to protect her, slipped her food, books. He taught her to read again. Earl closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slow. "She's alive because of him." "Where is he now?" Earl shook his head weakly. "Gone before the raid. Said he'd disappear before the law came crashing down." Elaine left the hospital that night with a strange new ache, a tangled knot of grief, gratitude, and guilt. She couldn't sleep, so she drove. Back to the junkyard. Back to where this had all started. The site was still taped off, though the police had cleared most evidence. She stood in the rain, looking at the rusted Cadillac. A memory flashed, Jim's hand resting on the steering wheel. Clara singing in the back seat. 16 years gone. Her husband buried in a shallow grave. Her daughter lost inside herself. And yet, somehow, they had survived. Behind her, footsteps. She turned. It was a teenage boy, soaked from the rain, hoodie clinging to his frame. In his hand, he held something. A small, beaten-up notebook. "Micah." He looked at her, shy, unsure. "I thought you might want this," he said, holding it out. Elaine took it with shaking hands. Inside, drawings, notes. Clara's handwriting, page after page. She remembered more than she let on, Micah said softly. She just needed time. Elaine stared at him. "Why'd you do it?" He looked down. "Because she was the only person there who ever said thank you." And just like that, another piece of the truth fell into place. Not with force, but with kindness, with humanity. Clara wasn't broken. She was buried. And now, bit by bit, they were digging her back into the light. 1 year later, the sun rose over Austin like it always did. Soft, golden, forgiving. The city was waking, but on a quiet porch tucked behind a garden of wild rosemary and old oak, a young woman sat cross-legged with a sketchbook in her lap and a pencil between her fingers. Clara. Not Samantha. Not the ghost of a stolen girl. Just Clara. Elaine watched her from the kitchen window. The sight still stole her breath. Her daughter, whole enough to sit in silence without fear. She was thinner now, still flinched when someone closed a door too quickly, but her eyes had returned. The hazel green that used to scan books and chase birds in the yard, those were back. So was her voice. Clara was taking classes online. one subject at a time. Art, then creative writing. She didn't rush. Elaine didn't push. Healing, they'd learned, had no deadline. Some days were storms, others were sunrise. Ruth had moved in 3 months after Clara's release. At first, just to help. But now, she was family. They shared meals, shared silence, shared the unbearable knowledge of what it meant to carry someone's trauma and not let it destroy you. The news media eventually moved on. Raymond and his men were all convicted. Life sentences. Dale died in county jail, stabbed by another inmate. Earl, the reluctant witness who saved them, had passed quietly in hospice. His last letter addressed to Clara. She read it often. As for Micah, he never returned, not in person. But every few weeks, a letter would arrive. No return address. Just a symbol drawn in the corner. A small wildflower. The same kind Clara had once pressed between notebook pages in captivity. A symbol of defiance, of memory. One of his letters included something different, a USB drive. Elaine almost didn't open it, but when she did, she found video footage, secretly filmed, over months. Evidence of the camp, the punishments, the rituals. Most chilling of all was a video of Clara, only 11 years old, sitting in a corner, whispering to herself the lyrics of a lullaby Elaine used to sing. She turned the footage over to the FBI. Micah's bravery, once invisible, now lived in case files in courtrooms. One evening, as the house settled into its gentle hush, Elaine sat with Clara on the porch. No words passed between them for several minutes. Just the shared comfort of presence. Then Clara said, "I think I want to speak. Publicly." Elaine turned. Clara's eyes didn't waver. "Not for me," she added. "For the girls still out there. The ones no one is looking for yet." Elaine swallowed hard. "You're sure?" Clara nodded. "They took my voice. I want it back, and I want them to hear it." Weeks later, in a community hall filled with survivors and advocates, Clara stood before a microphone. Elaine and Ruth sat in the front row holding hands. The room was quiet as Clara began. "My name is Clara." Her voice didn't shake. "For 16 years, I was silent. I was told who to be, how to kneel, what not to remember. But the truth is louder than fear, and love, once you find it again, is louder than anything." She paused, looked out, smiled, just slightly. "I'm not a victim. I'm a witness." Thunderous applause rose like a wave, not pity, not sadness, just fierce, reverent acknowledgement. Back home, that night, as the house fell quiet and the stars blinked gently in the sky, Clara stood in her room beside her window. The light from the hallway spilled softly across the floor. In her hands, she held a notebook, the same one Micah had left behind. She opened it to a blank page. Then, slowly, she began to write. Not about pain, not about captivity, but about resilience. About a garden that grew in a burned field. About a girl who survived because someone believed she was still in there, waiting. Outside, the wind shifted, and in the silence of that night, something healed. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to begin again.